So, good morning, everyone. Thank you for taking some time to join our webinar today. I know all of you are very busy CEOs and executives, and I know your number one focus needs to be taking care of your clients and running your businesses. We will be as brief as possible and have time at the end of the webinar for Q&A. But I promise you what we're going to share with you today is an extremely important topic that you must address and need to protect your organizations. But before we get into that, just a little bit about me. Some of you I actually work with now, and some not. But my name is Will Manguel. I'm the president at Tactical Tek Incorporated. I personally have 25 years of professional IT experience. We've been in business since 2005. We're based out of Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and we support clients all across South Central Pennsylvania. We have clients in the following industries: accounting, insurance, financial, government, legal, manufacturing, medical, nonprofit, construction, and engineering, just to name a few. My firm offers IT consulting and support, cybersecurity, compliance, and we also offer a virtual chief security officer service. But quite frankly, it amazes me how many small to medium-sized businesses I've worked with who either don't have cyber insurance, they have cyber insurance but lack adequate coverage, or just don't think they need cyber insurance. So that's why we've partnered up with Brian Mahone, EHD's cyber insurance expert and producer. So at this time, I'd like to pass the mic over to Brian.
Thanks so much, Will. Brian Mahone here. For the folks on the call who might not know EHD, Engelham Brighton Davies, we're an independent insurance agency here in Lancaster. We've been here over 100 years or so. I never pass up an opportunity to talk cyber liability, cyber risk management, cyber insurance. It's something I've really come to enjoy talking about. There's a lot of myths, misconceptions, or just lack of education on the topic. So we really have three agenda items through hopefully the next 30 minutes or so, and then we can use the whole rest of the hour for Q&A. So we're going to talk about, who are these bad guys, threat actors, hackers, kind of what's going on out there externally. What is cyber insurance? Break that down based off the different insuring agreements and what it is and what it isn't, and why consider it. And then best practices around procuring cyber insurance, best practices about applying, best practices from an IT control and cyber hygiene perspective, and most importantly, best practices around incident response, right? What happens when, the proverbial stuff hits the fan, right? So no further ado, who are these bad guys? There's kind of this myth, it's a guy in a hoodie and a laptop. And really, that's just not true. These hacking groups, we call them bad actors or threat actors in cybersecurity world, right? It is more of this second picture here. It's more of a legitimate call center business, and there's all types of different types, right? So the APTs, advanced persistent threats. I mean, these are the low and slow, kind of long-term, well-funded, often backed by government agencies, very capable, very sophisticated. You might have heard of maybe the SolarWinds attack, or most recently the Change Healthcare Optum cyber attack. They're thought to be an advanced persistent threat group, maybe Russia, maybe China. Organized crime, right? They're sending spam, phishing, spyware, malware, trying to do identity fraud. They're out to make a quick buck, right? And historically, they've gone after healthcare and finance. There's, industrial spies. China's known to have stolen a lot of intellectual property from the U.S., right? There's also, script kiddies, right? People who are maybe just hobbyists, maybe a teenager with a gaming laptop, right? Who is just kind of out to break stuff for notoriety and for fun. Worm writers, there's black and white hat hackers, right? The white hat hackers are typically the security researchers, kind of the good guys who, are playing defense, where the black hackers are don't have access to do what they're doing, right? They're malicious with their intent. You've also probably heard of the anonymous hacking group, right? They're thought of to be a hacktivist group where they're going after maybe nonprofits or government entities, or wreaking havoc for some sort of social justice cause or something, right? And then insider threats. Edward Snowden, very popular example. There was another gentleman in the U.S. Air Force, I think, a summer or two ago, that was kind of bragging about having insider information, and yeah, got thrown in jail. So that's who, why, right? Really, to put it simply, for money. This graph kind of outlines how personal health information could be monetized. You'll notice there's not just one way, right? They can do insurance fraud. They can flip your data on the black market, and you can use your imagination with this chart. The same thing for personal financial information and personally identifiable information. So PFI being, credit cards, bank account numbers, PII being, name, address, social security address, driver's license, things like that. How are these guys doing it? Hopefully, a lot of these terms are familiar. Typically, I'm like, which one don't you know up here? People say DDoS attack, a distributed denial of service attack, right? That's where a threat actor sends so many responses from computers, maybe dozens, hundreds of servers and computers, all pointing it at one direction, at your server, your computer, and overwhelming it, effectively breaking it and breaking through. I'll say the number two issues we have in cyber insurance world is certainly, business email compromise or phishing, social engineering. You hear all these kind of different terms for it, but in a nutshell, it's you're getting duped, whether that's text message, email, even voice or video now, to voluntarily part with money. Classic example, controller gets an email from a new CFO saying, "Hey, wire this money here. We got a new client." She thinks she's, doing what her job is with listening to her new boss, and she sends $100,000 out the window, really, to a bank in Hong Kong. So
I get those 3 days a week.
Yep. And Will's dealing with a similar incident right now with one of his clients. So it's real. And it's becoming more prevalent and more available. And then, yeah, funds transfer fraud too. We kind of talked about these. This was an interesting stat, came out back in 2019, that essentially said, hey, most small businesses who suffer a cyber incident will go out of business because it's so bad. 60%. Take that data with a grain of salt, but it kind of hits the point home. This one's interesting too. Pennsylvania is a top 10 state, according to the FBI, for cybercrime. And unfortunately, it's gone up in losses and complaints just about every single year. To certainly losses, but maybe people stop complaining a little bit in 2022, I guess. And privacy laws, right? You might have heard of GDPR, the Global Data Protection Act in Europe. Basically, California mimicked it, the California Consumer Privacy Act. They recently have made it more strict. Every state is essentially following suit. Will we ever have a national privacy law? Who knows? It would certainly make a lot of people's lives easier, specifically a lot of the privacy attorneys I'm friends with. But, increased regulation really just increases the need for cyber insurance, because you're essentially prepaying legal expenses just to a certain degree. What's interesting is like, oh, well, it's not being enforced. What are the fines and penalties? We have a lovely example in Pennsylvania where the state attorney general actually did impose fines and penalties, not necessarily under a privacy law, but the Breach of Personal Information Notification Act. And this example with Uber, basically they lost about 13,000 Pennsylvania Uber drivers' license numbers, and the whole driver's license. This turned into a class action lawsuit nationally, where other states kind of piled in, but it gives us kind of the calculation, right? You can estimate about $1,000 fine per record. And everybody loves to talk about AI, especially in 2024. It's both good and bad. There aren't really AI exclusions baked into cyber insurance policies, right? But AI is certainly having an impact on cybersecurity in general. There's a huge skill gap. Actually, on the board of ISC Squared in South Central Pennsylvania, which is just a chapter of cybersecurity professionals focused on continuing education, and they came out with a report last year saying, "Hey, there's about 3 million people we need that don't exist." Right, so AI is filling that gap of humans. It's helping folks like Will and his team do some of the manual, mindless kind of grunt work, so to speak, of checking logs or double checking notifications on various apps or software. Maybe running reports a little bit more efficiently or faster or better. But on the same time, it's giving the bad guys technology to do their job better, faster, more efficiently, easier. One important thing worth mentioning at the beginning of this year, we saw our first ever deep fake kind of AI voice cloning insurance claim. It was a company in Hong Kong, and the finance director got on a Microsoft Teams call, just like we're on right now, and saw the CEO and the CFO and the COO in both their image and their voice, and they were talking about this new client that they needed to pay the $25 million deposit for, and she sent it, and it was completely AI generated, both the image and the voice. So I'll say, if you ever get one of those annoying phone calls that's like, "Hey, your car warranty expired, renew it, blah blah blah." Like, yes, that's a scam, but that's not the main purpose of that. A lot of times they will use that's a way to pick up your audio and then use it to create deep fake voice of you, so they can call your wife or your spouse or maybe your kid and say, "Hey, I'm in jail. Can you bail me out?" We've heard of instances with parents with teenagers where they're at a concert, and they keep getting messages from their kid that, oh, they got kidnapped, or they're trapped, or they need money, but they're not answering their phone because it's loud and they can't hear it at the concert. So there's all sorts of kind of creative ways you could use an AI voice of someone else, right? So literally create a verbal kind of password would be my advice with your family, your close-knit family. If you get a weird panicky phone call, don't assume it's them, even though it sounds just like them. So jumping into our second topic here, cyber insurance 101, I'll kick this off with two stories. The first one is actually one from my father-in-law. He runs a beer distributing company here in South Central Pennsylvania. So they're the middleman between, your favorite bar, maybe Decades downtown, or Sheets or something, and their suppliers are your favorite beverage, adult beverage, right? So they have first, second, and third shift. The third shift guy got an email from the second shift guy saying, "Hey, check out this trucking industry product. It's awesome. Made my life so much easier." He clicks on it. Boom. That's how the bad guys got in. Next day, my father-in-law goes in, skull bones across all the computers in the whole company, got hit with ransomware, got the FBI involved. They had cyber insurance. They had to recreate 3 years of customer data of like invoices and whatnot. So they had to pay, their sales people, ex-employees, pay them overtime, really kind of all hands on deck. There was concept of bricking. The incident was so bad that their hardware, their computers, phones, servers, laptops, were bricked. They were as useless as a brick, so they had to replace them. Spent 20 grand on that, and then paid overtime. So someone who started out slinging kegs when they were 18, and then ended up running the place. He worked there for 30 years, said this was the most stressful 2 weeks of his entire life. So that's the first story. The second story is kind of a hypothetical, right? So this is your house, right? This is your lovely basement in South Central Pennsylvania, maybe with one of these thunderstorms rolling through. You know how to deal with this situation, right? You need to call like Roto-Rooter or ServPro. get all the moldy furniture out there, remove the carpet, remove the drywall, rent these fans, maybe replace drywall, replace furniture. Like, you know who to hire, which contractors you need to go about dealing with that. But now imagine yourself as my father-in-law, where you have, skull bones in your laptop, right? Do you call me? Do you call Will? You don't necessarily call either of them. Like, we can help you a little bit, but we can't really do all the things that need to be done. So you're an insurance agency. You can't log into your agency management system. You're a physician's office that can't log into their patient management system, right? Like, you're dead in the water. So who do you call? Well, if you have a thorough, robust cyber insurance policy, you call a 1-800-365 incident response hotline. And that hotline is manned by a privacy attorney, right? They act as a data breach response coach, kind of like a quarterback that runs the team, the incident response team, the firefighters, right? So the first thing they're going to do is deploy IT forensics, which a lot of these people are ex-military, charge hundreds, if not thousands of dollars an hour. They have supercomputers. They're very expensive and very sophisticated with what they do. They figure out, how the bad guys got in, what did they take. They give that forensics report back to legal to say, hey, was this incident truly a data breach? Because a data breach is a legal term. Oh, and by the way, this whole time you're a sitting duck, and for maybe a week or two or a month, and you still have to pay your rent and your utility bill and your insurance. So you have this business interruption component to this. And maybe you need to replace hardware. Maybe you want to keep it out of the LMP or the local news. So you get a public relations specialist to kind of smooth things over with your current customers or potential future customers, right? Maybe your Uber and the attorney general's knocking down your door for fines and penalties, right? So that's really where cyber insurance enters the scene. We'll talk about what it does both pre-incident and post-incident. So these next few slides is kind of the structure of the policy. And, any insurance policy is a contract, right? So, carrier A, B, and C, and the rows are the different insuring agreements. So, I'll kind of fly through this because you already know what it does based off that story. But it's first party, third party, and cybercrime. So first party is me. I'm the policyholder. I bought this. I need help. I am a sitting duck with business interruption. One thing that's becoming incredibly scrutinized and frequent right now, you might also have heard of the CK CRM software that a lot of car dealerships use. Basically, no one could buy a car in the country for like a day or two, which was very problematic because they're all using the same software. That was a contingent business interruption or key supplier insurance claim. If you were a car dealership and you couldn't use that, this software over here had that incident, right? So think of how many businesses rely on Amazon Web Services, or how many businesses rely on QuickBooks, or how many businesses rely on, any industry specific piece of technology that you use, right? The whole name of the game is it's financial loss coverage for the loss of PII, PFI, or PHI for users of technology. That's what cyber insurance does. And newsflash, it's 2024. If you're a legitimate business, you use technology. You have social media, you have a website, all of those things, right? So we'll kind of skip first party. Third party is, hey, I'm getting sued. I'm getting scary messages, letters from my clients whose data I lost, or patients, or whoever. So that network security, privacy liability is your third party liability. Maybe you lost credit card information. So there's the Payment Card Industry Act that you could be subject to fines and penalties. And, oh, we use Square, or we use a point of sale system. Well, it's still your business and your customers' data, so you're still responsible to a certain extent, right? We talked about regulators. Media liability. This is an interesting one. I'll stop and slow down on for a second. I mentioned we all do social media, right? Blogging. Maybe you have Google reviews or product reviews, or your maybe use cases why your product's better than a competitor's, right? So you think of this as multimedia liability, content publishing liability, libel, slander, plagiarism, invasion of privacy, wrongful detainment, intellectual property, right? With AI, people stealing images, or it accidentally stealing images or mixing them together or whatever. Any company who does a lot of marketing or advertising is really a media company to a certain extent. So you might say, hey, well, I have, a BOP, a business owner's policy, or general liability, which has been around for hundreds of years. What a cyber insurance policy is puts all those things I just mentioned into the 21st century for an online format. A general liability or business owner's policy really only does that in kind of written or physically published works, where a cyber policy brings it into a digital format, right, or online. And then cyber crime, right? Hey, we lost some money here. Either it was stolen by brute force, or we were manipulated or deceived, or they got in somehow without us being manipulated or deceived, and they initiated the transfer themselves. So why would you consider cyber insurance? I mean, really just applying, you're going to learn a lot about your business, of where you kind of stand in terms of your controls, and we'll talk more on that. Right, you're probably not covered. I kind of alluded to that. I mean, these business owners' policies, these endorsements, these riders, these throw-ins, they're not enough. Like, yes, a crime policy might have a little bit of cybercrime coverage. A property policy might have a little bit of kind of data replacement, hardware replacement coverage, but you're not going to get the 1-800-365 incident response hotline with your own privacy attorney and your own public relations specialist and your own forensics person without a full-fledged cyber insurance policy, or just going and contacting those vendors yourself in a crisis, which could be not very fun. Not to mention, these billion-dollar insurance carriers have negotiated these rates down as much as they possibly could. Cyber insurance is also affordable, right? Like, I've seen physicians' offices get, um, $1 million of coverage for their, less than 28 person employee business for a few $1,000s a year. It's not something that really breaks the bank, in my opinion. I won't say it's required by law, but what it does in certain states, right? It is covering things you'd have to do by law, like the notifying those impacted by the incident. So buying the policy isn't required by law, but notifying the individuals is, which the policy does. And then a lot of customers are requiring it, right? I mean, if you work with a school or the state of Pennsylvania or Comcast or any kind of bigger entity, Deloitte, and you're a subcontractor, a lot of times these prime contractors are requiring some amount of it. I know every financial advising firm is required to have it through, wherever they kind of hang their shingles, Schwab or Fidelity or whatever. And yeah, accidents happen. Will and I was talking about this before we jumped on the webinar. Was, I could get you the Cadillac of cybersecurity, or you could be Fort Knox or whatever, and accidents still happen. Employees still click on links, or software is not perfect. And then yeah, the policy really gives you peace of mind where you have that panic button available. What's also interesting is clearly majority of the people are getting this for the post-incident service providers, but they're starting to really get crafty with the pre-incident service providers, right? You might get a free hour of cybersecurity consulting. You might get a little 10% discount on some sort of software tool, like employee security awareness training, or some sort of EDR ransomware monitoring tool. Unfortunately, 90% of policyholders don't even know this or use it. So I always kind of throw this in here that, hey, the low-hanging fruit, if you have a policy, is say, hey, what comes with it that before I have an incident. And then post-incident, I kind of put this in here just to give you an idea of some of the company names you might recognize, like Experian and Equifax. They're big notification service providers. Some people have heard of Kroll, that does a lot of forensics. More for the more technical folks who are like, well, who's actually doing this? A little bit of a premium cap. Cyber's in a softish market right now. We expect it to harden back up a little bit in the next 6 to 18 months, especially with the, certain industries, right? Healthcare with the Change Optum thing, car dealerships with the CK breach, right? Whenever there's these big mega breaches, the cyber insurance carrier market responds. They just sometimes don't respond very quickly. I always say cyber insurance is like the wild west of the cyber insurance industry, right? Not all policies created equal. We already talked about some of these. The one I'll mention is neglected software, right? I call it the IT guy asleep at the wheel. So you have a policy, you think you're good, you got $1 million limits, and then, oh, hey, my iPhone iOS needs updated, or my Microsoft Exchange needs updated, and we never updated it. And oh, it was a critical exploit, right? It was a critical issue. It was a known issue, and you did nothing. These policies will slowly decrease your coverage over time. So if, yeah, your IT guy's asleep at the wheel, and then come claim time, you never patch that known vulnerability, your $1 million policy could go down to zero, or say $500,000. So patching is important, right? And who you're partnering with from a managed service provider, IT provider perspective is important. Ransom, we'll break down some industry stuff, right? I think we have folks from like public entities on the call, accounting, insurance, kind of professional services, some construction. So yeah, dive through this as with your unique lens. I will say all the industry is getting hit harder right now, kind of the bigger chunk of these pies. A lot of the times they have small IT budgets or cybersecurity budgets in general. They aren't regulated as much as other industries, like finance and healthcare have a lot of regulations, and education even does. But there's really nothing mandating, like say, a law firm to have cyber insurance, right? They probably have a big customer that requires it, but legally or regulatorily, they're not required. And then you're seeing, the bulk of the expenses is from ransomware, at least, is if you have to make that ransomware payment to the threat actors. And I will say they're pretty honest, like they're reputable, quote unquote reputable. A lot of the times if they say, hey, we'll give you the encryption key to get your data back, like they will let you test it and make sure it works. These cyber insurance policies come with a ransomware negotiator. It's often an ex-FBI person, and they will pretend to pay it to buy time to respond to the incident, or they will help negotiate it down if they know you're SOL and you have to pay it. So this whole misnomer of like never pay the ransom is nonsense. Like sometimes you have to, but a lot of people feel like, whoa, well, you're helping out the criminals, you're funding their activity, and it's true, but at the same time, the whole point of insurance is to put you in the place you were before the incident at the least expensive way possible. So if it costs $1 million to rebuild all your data and hardware and not pay the ransom, but you could pay the ransom for 100K, the cyber insurance carrier is going to want you to pay the ransom for 100K. And a lot of the times you may not have say in settlement baked into the policy. Sometimes you'll have to negotiate that up front. So more industry data, and the reason we're all here today is a lot of folks just don't understand their exposures, and then they don't understand what's covered, and then they're worried about the cost. And the reason they're getting it is they see it in the news. A lot of these publicly traded companies you see in the news, they legally have to disclose, where a lot of the local small businesses do not. But these threat actors know that all these small businesses are connected to the larger businesses through, subcontracting and whatnot, and they're easier to break into. So thinking, yeah, it's a big company problem is not true. You're quote unquote a smaller target, but you have less defenses, less IT budget, less cybersecurity, and you're still connected to the big guys, right? The famous Target incident, the big retailer, how the bad guys got in? They got in through an HVAC contractor in Pittsburgh, small little business, and took down the whole company. If you're on a nonprofit board, cyber insurance, or just a board in general, cyber insurance becoming a bigger topic because you have a duty to look out for the best interests of the organization, and cyber insurance issues can turn into directors and officers issues where, hey, you didn't look out for the best interests of the organization because you didn't do XYZ, you didn't buy proper industry standard cyber security solutions or cyber insurance, and because of that, this is turning into a D&O claim. So there's definitely a trend in that, certainly more for publicly traded companies, but the same idea applies. This just came out last week, so I threw this slide in yesterday, just kind of took a snip. Every industry has a different reason they buy cyber insurance or a different exposure. I happen to work in a lot of healthcare, manufacturers, professional services, and public entities. So I just wanted to touch on these three boxes based off our audience today, right? So business interruption is huge. You're a sitting duck. Public entities. Oh, you can't provide, I don't know, any public service, right? Parking or sewer or electricity or water or I don't know, ways to pay your taxes or anything you can kind of think of, right? So this one says, yeah, public services comes to a halt after a ransomware attack, locks down systems. Big Colonial Pipeline issue. That was a private company, but you get the idea. And then construction, right? So a lot of contractors, small businesses are like, I don't really have a cyber exposure. I don't have any data, right? And we'll just go back to pen and paper if something happens. If we can't use our project management software, let's say. Well, how many vendors and subcontractors and clients are you sending money out the door to? You all probably use email and banking and all of that. We had an issue with one of our clients at EHD that was in construction where they were actually using a third party, like kind of in fintech vendor paying solution in the construction industry to kind of pay their vendors or subcontractors. And there was an issue between kind of the three parties. And yeah, the cyber insurance was dicey and kind of how muddy that was. So definitely pay your own vendors, but yeah, you can think of the same thing in real estate. Like how many you've all heard horror stories of like a couple saving up their whole life to put a down payment on a house, and they go to closing and the money didn't go where it was supposed to. So that funds transfer, social engineering, that's what these red boxes are in professional service firms. Yeah, even insurance, right? Oh, hey, I'm going to pay my annual premiums. Accounts payable person, can you just wire the 60 grand to whoever? Hackers are in the email system and rerouting it. Will and I have seen things like that in professional services this year. This is an interesting chart, reputational harm, right? Costs of a data breach. This is kind of indirect or not hard dollar costs, but kind of some interesting stats, right? Like half of consumers will look elsewhere if they feel like their provider isn't taking cybersecurity seriously or suffers a data breach. And we all know that we as humans gravitate towards the negative over the positive, right? No one's ever in the news for having amazing insurance and cybersecurity. It's just not interesting. It doesn't get the views, and nobody cares, even though you should, right? So yeah, the meat and potatoes here will fly through for the next 5 minutes and get to any Q&A, and we can even open the mics up too, or you can type in the chat. But like, what can you do? Tips, tricks, best practices. Let's start with like, how do cyber underwriters even rate my cyber insurance policy, right? There's these 5 things up here. The only one you control is the last one. IT controls your cyber hygiene, your posture. You're not going to change industries. You're not going to, not collect the data you need to run your business. Obviously, you want revenue to go up regardless. Loss history, I'll touch on briefly too. If you've had an incident, tell a story, right? These underwriters are humans. They want to hear what happened, how bad was it, how much money was spent, what did you learn, what did you implement, why are you a better risk now after an incident? Just because you've had a cyber incident, don't assume like you're uninsurable. It's actually some of the best risks if you're working with somebody who knows what they're talking about. IT controls, right? I like this kind of traffic light, red, yellow, green, good, better, best. I found this in probably early 2023, and we'll update it here on the next slide for 2024. But if your company's in the red, which I think all of Tactical Tek's clients definitely are pushing into the amber and green. But let's say your company's in the red, right? You may not qualify for cyber insurance, or you may get ripped off in terms of terms or super high premiums, or there might be 10 carriers interested in your business, now go down to one or two because your controls are bad, right? You basically just have MFA and some backups and that's it, and you're just hoping that that's enough. And maybe it used to be 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago, but it's not anymore. um, we want to see robust employee training as a minimum. We want to see MFA as a minimum. Obviously, multiple copies of backups and offline backups as a minimum. If you want to look more attractive to underwriters, if you're doing IT budgeting, if you're hearing different buzzwords and you want to know, well, what do cyber insurance underwriters care about, right? Um, there's a really big push into, and this is industry dependent and company size dependent, but PAM solutions, privileged access management, where you kind of control who has access to what data in your organization. Obviously, you don't want the janitor to have access to, your QuickBooks account, right? Take that extreme example and apply it across your organization. Security information and event monitoring, SIEM tools, or MDR tools, managed detection and response, right? I've read online, if you were to buy the computing power, the software, and the human capital, right? The cybersecurity white hat people in-house at your organization, it could cost like $1 million to implement MDR or a security operations center, a SOC, right? But there are a ton of solutions out there that you can do that for tens of thousands of dollars by outsourcing it, right? So that's why everybody's doing it. There was a big article that came out in like 2020 that said, hey, if everybody implements MFA, we could have, avoided 80% of our cyber insurance claims. Well, the same thing's kind of happening now with MDR, where, hey, we analyzed all of our cyber insurance claims, and had they had an MDR solution in place, we would have avoided the majority of the issue. And really what it does is it combines kind of the threat detection and monitoring with humans to actually verify that and respond and kind of automate some initial responses, right? So it's a mitigation tool. So insurance carriers really like it because instead of you maxing out your policy limits, maybe you're only using half of it or a fourth of it. Same with pen testing, right? I mean, it's why these big companies do hackathons where you pay a third party to break your stuff and then tell us how you broke it, and we'll reward you. So that idea is popular in certain industries and certainly popular in cyber insurance underwriting of hey, you need to meet maybe a compliance guideline in your industry, or you're just trying to get better and you don't, it's kind of like when your teachers would redline your essays or your tests, right? They're pointing out, where you failed and where you need to improve on. So that's pen testing kind of enables that. In terms of applying for cyber insurance, it's all about how are you mitigating risks, right? You want to be as thorough and descriptive as possible. You want to have finance, IT, and the insurance person all collaborating to understand what questions being asked. If it's a poorly written question, which a lot of them are, if it's yes, no, and you feel like you're 80% to a yes, certainly include that. You can include it on the PDF application, in a Word doc, in an email. And even if you have an big IT project, right? Oh, we budgeted all this money, but it's not going to be done until 6 months from now, and our policy renews now. Include that information when you apply and say, hey, we know you want us to have these things. They're not quite there yet, but we're working on it. Here's the timeline. Here's the solution or the product. And it's 50% deployed or 80% deployed or whatever. We can use that information in our industry to get better results, whether that's higher limits, lower premiums, lower deductibles, better terms. So yeah, definitely explain that. And yeah, if you do a bad job, if you lie, like a company did in Illinois, whether they did it knowingly or unknowingly, CEO filled out the cyber insurance application. Their manufacturer said, hey, yeah, we have MFA. Yes, 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 yes. Well, turns out they didn't have it on company email. They didn't have it for privileged privileged access, right? The crown jewels, or IT administrator access, or remote access to company network and company email. They just had it on like this one little piece of inventory management software. They had MFA on, one piece of their whole business, and they said, claim denied. So tips, on the insurance side, try to work with people who understand a little bit about cybersecurity. On the IT side, try to understand people who know a little bit about cyber insurance. And clearly they have to, stay in their lanes and hand the baton off and all those things. But they should be collaborating. That's really the take home there. You want to start early. I mean, you don't need to start like 6 months in advance, but like the whole 30 days out thing doesn't really work well. You want to start thinking about reapplying and renewing. I mean, our standard at EHD is 120 days, but 60 or 90 can do it too. But we see issues where, oh, hey, this carrier's appetite changed, right? And we're 30 days from renewal, and we can't implement MFA or MDR or whatever in that time frame because we have hundreds of users, and it takes time. These cyber insurance policies, right? I told you they come with a 365, 24/7 instant response hotline. Put that freaking phone number in your cell phone because it's going to be, 4th of July weekend, Friday at 11 p.m. when it goes down, and you're not going to have your company laptop. And if you do, it's probably going to have skull bones on it. So just make sure that you have that, right? And make sure you're not waiting weeks and weeks and weeks to do that. Like we see a lot of folks who have cyber incidents and they don't tell us for months or weeks. And it's like, dude, you had insurance for that. And there's a thing called a notice of circumstance where you're like, hey, we don't really know if this is an issue. Like sales guy lost a laptop in an Uber that was unencrypted, but like it's not a data breach and it's not a cyber insurance claim, but like it could become one. So they're willing to help you with that type of stuff, and then it won't count against you, right? But yeah, they do have clauses where, oh yeah, hey, we got hacked like 2 years ago. Can you give us money for that? Like that's not going to fly. And then yeah, invest in IT controls. I shared with you the traffic light and processes and procedures. What do we got here? Like 5 more minutes. Talked about that. Don't destroy logs. Will and I ran into this too. Like, don't be going in there deleting stuff, changing stuff. Like these forensics people need to see the crime scene. It's how they do their job. So if you try to, I don't want to say cover it up, but try to mitigate it on your own, or with your brother-in-law who's your IT guy or something, it's going to severely diminish the incident response. It is a crisis, though. You do want to act fast. It's a lot of time the damage can be mitigated if you don't wait. If you have an incident response plan, reference it, use it. And if you don't, maybe think about creating one. I have templates I can give you for free, and communicate. A lot of times when folks actually have an incident, they'll get on a Teams call with their incident response team like every hour, every single day, just to say, where are we at? What do we need to do? Let's see here. I'll skip all this and open it up for Q&A here. But these are some of the carriers we like, some questions to ask. Heath said he raised his hand. You can unmute yourself if you'd like.
Yeah. My biggest issue that I have right now as we're implementing our cybersecurity, our PII, our cyber training internally, is the pushback from the various parts of the organization saying, oh, this part of the organization really doesn't have to do it. And no, everyone has to do it, even if it's the stripped down model, maybe not all the subcategories, but everyone's got to go through cyber training. And we're having major pushback because they don't feel that, the departments don't feel that they really have exposure, which we know is untrue because everyone's on email. So
Yeah.
how do we handle that and say, again, the exposure is from the lower level because that is the easiest entry point?
Will, you want to comment on that? I mean, I have my thoughts. It's a cultural issue. I'd like to think education. I mean, invite some of those lower level folks saying that in your organization to this webinar. Send them the recording and say, look, these things are happening to our peers and competitors, and And yeah, I can give Keith you a local example of that in South Central Pennsylvania and say, hey, this is what has happened to this other parking authority. So I think that helps. What would you say, Will?
Yeah, Keith. So what I would recommend, and we've done this with prospects and clients, is to actually get a risk assessment done and show them the proof. And a risk assessment would be basically like a basic pen test, right? Something that Brian mentioned in his presentation, and actually have the place tested and have those users who you're concerned about have a security scan done on their computers and show that to upper management and say, hey, this is what I'm talking about. These users, they store passwords on their computers.
But what's amazing, it's not even computers. Yep. We have, as a parking authority and enforcement, we are pay on foot. We are on the road. We are out there. We're using mobile devices.
Yep.
And that's where the entry point is. Yeah. Obviously, inside the office, we can be more mandated. It's again, we have email on a phone and no one's thinking, oh, that's a risk.
Yeah. And to add to that, Keith, the other addition to that would be to actually have a phishing test done where we can actually send a simulated phishing email to those users and then report the findings and say, hey, this is the low-hanging fruit. This is
we actually currently we're on our 5th phishing test that we do them every 2 weeks.
Yeah, I mean, and other than that, I mean, you got to get buy-in from upper management. I mean, that's something that we've struggled with as well. If upper management isn't buying into the thought of implementing security,
right?
Unfortunately, it's not going to go anywhere. I mean, it really starts from the top down, right. And it has to be. It could be, it's a cultural change, something that's baked into your your handbook, your employee policies, but you got to get buy-in from the executives from the top down, or it doesn't matter what security you roll out. They're either not going to take it serious or not going to implement it properly. And that's kind of my 2 cents, Brian. What do you think? You got anything else to add to that?
No, I think you nailed it. We have another question from Deb. I'll read here to everybody. It says, I'm sure ransomware through your company's system will affect your access to files that are saved on a third-party server. However, are the files on the third-party server typically safe, like Amazon Web Services, OneDrive, data centers? What would cyber insurance cover in this case? You want to cover the first half of that question, Will?
Yeah, so Deb's actually one of our clients.
Okay.
They work with, they actually have a financial investment firm. So Deb, it's actually, believe it or not, it's a shared security model is what these cloud providers have. If you look at their SLA, which is their service level agreement. So there's a misconception that if you go to the cloud, for example, like Microsoft 365, which most of our clients have, that the data that you store on Microsoft 365 servers, that's Microsoft's responsibility to secure those files. That's actually incorrect. It's a shared approach. So, that doesn't answer your question entirely, but just because you're using a third-party server doesn't necessarily mean that the data is secure. Now, the connection to the server is secure, right? But once the data is at rest on their servers, right, it's a shared security model.
I've actually read some of those agreements, and it will say, hey, user, you're responsible for the security settings, and hey, user, your client's data is your client's data that you're, legally from an insurance perspective and privacy perspective, you're responsible for notifying them that it was lost, whether that was Amazon Web Services fault or your fault, doesn't really matter. And from an insurance perspective, right, I would say that's a dependent supplier, contingent business interruption, right? This technology service provider we rely on over here had a cyber incident, and because of that, we suffered financial loss. Just you lose your customer's data. That's third-party cyber privacy security insuring agreement. You're welcome. Let me see here. Okay, so we're just over the hour mark. If yeah, anybody else has any questions, Will and I maybe stick around for 5 more minutes. But thank you so much for joining us. Um, if you have any kind of offline concerns, you'll get the recording, the contact information for Will and I. And yeah, appreciate all the EHD clients on board who joined. Maybe you work with Brad Evans or Kyle Weimer or some of my colleagues down the hall here, and yeah, vice versa for Tactical Tech. Thanks for taking Will up on the offer to listen to myself today. Alex is typing something. Yeah, a few people logging off here. Thanks, Keith. Good, great comments. You're welcome.
Any discounting?
Yeah, I did forget to mention that. We're seeing a lot of activity in the cyber insurance world, where if you have MDR implemented, right? So there's Sophos, Huntress, SentinelOne, there's CrowdStrike, there's all these MDR providers. A lot of them are giving legitimate publishing, hey, if you have one of these, you're going to get a 10% discount or a 12% discount or whatever. Now, granted, a lot of these solutions are, tens of thousands of dollars from what I know, and Will probably knows their pricing structure more than I do. So, is 10% impactful on your $10,000 or $20,000 cyber insurance premium? I don't know. It just kind of depends on the company, right? But that is certainly one trend we're seeing right now, and sometimes there's even partnerships, right? Like Marsh partnered with Amazon Web Services, and I think AtBay partnered with SentinelOne or something. So there's a lot of kind of teaming up. There's even an insurance carrier called Alpha Secure that is trying to kind of deploy their own MDR solution, which I don't recommend you get your software security from your cyber insurance carrier, but kind of a unique situation for maybe some smaller businesses. And of course, every 3 years or so, I always recommend businesses kind of see what else is out there from a carrier perspective, right? They all have different appetites where, oh, hey, we love Pennsylvania, or we love healthcare, or we hate manufacturing, and they kind of pivot and adjust, and losses come in, and underwriting guidelines tighten up or whatever. So that's just the nature of the beast, really, across insurance in general. Catherine, do you have any questions?
No, I don't. We actually had a cyber insurance issue or a breach this year. So this has just been informative for me. We're already insured and everything, but it's been nice to just.
So would have been great to have this maybe a year ago, right? You probably learned a lot about what we talked about, unfortunately, in
the hard way.
In the response. Yeah, the hard way, so to speak.
Yeah, it was baptism by fire.
Yeah.
Baptism by fire. I like that.
Hey, Catherine. So Brian, Catherine, they're actually one of our clients as well.
Okay.
And we worked with them and the incident response team that was provided through their carrier. And Catherine, if you don't mind answering this question, if you didn't have cyber insurance, what do you think would have cost you guys in the forensics and the attorneys that we were on conference calls with? What do you think that might have cost you guys if you didn't have cyber insurance in place?
It was what I actually ended up paying was $1,500, and it would have been just under $12,000. So honestly, we're not a big company in the grand scheme of things. That wouldn't have sunk us, but a lot better to pay $1,500.
That's still like a 10 times difference, though. So think of a large organization paying $100,000 versus $1 million or something,
Yeah. And it's really interesting because working, like I said, this was a first for me and hopefully a last, but working with the forensic people, super interesting because the amount of data they pull that we had to go through, and you can see exactly where it happened. And it's just crazy. exactly when, exactly where, the IP address of the hackers, and it was, yeah, really informative. Terrifying, but informative.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then
What happened was the hackers actually, like, without giving away too much information, got in touch with, or somehow like mimicked our insurance carriers' email addresses. And you know, we're all trying to be really cautious around here, but the email address that was spoofing our insurance broker was one letter off.
Yeah.
And obviously this hacker bot, or I don't know, whatever it was, had read correspondence between these two people and was able to like
Jump
make
in.
it sound like this person's voice in the email. So there was really, I mean, unless we had clicked on their email address and checked, which we do now, to make sure that it's actually spelled correctly and, you know, coming from that person. It was pretty crazy.
Yeah. The one character was the door opener for them. Yeah.
Yeah.
we're actually dealing with a cyber situation this morning, actually right before I got on the call with Brian with one of our other clients, where it looks like one of the users' email accounts got compromised, and the hacker went into their email, created specific rules, and these rules can do weird things, as in every incoming or outgoing email sent from that user, the hacker gets a copy of it, right? So they know, they could see the actual communications. But basically, to sum it up, what this hacker did, they hacked this, they got into this person's email account and started sending copies of, basically spamming everyone in his address book. So everyone in his organization, and you're probably talking about maybe 25 people, got this email from this specific user, and people outside of his organization that are in his contact list. And we were, pretty much all morning, we were getting emails from other users at their office asking us if the email is legitimate, because they get this email from this individual and they're like, well, this is weird. It's saying, click here to check my voicemail, or click here to hear this message. So, this stuff is alive and well. I mean, I harp on my clients. I preach about the importance of having, not just having cyber insurance, but having the cybersecurity protection in place.
Slam.
But, to add to that, Keith, I also tell my clients, there isn't a such thing as a 100% secure environment. It does not exist. It does not exist. And cybersecurity isn't one thing. I've had clients say, sell me cybersecurity. They think it's this. It's one thing. No, cybersecurity
and that's just it. I
it's
mean,
a
this
layered
is where
approach.
we talk about the, again, that phishing attempt. Okay, I know they're in my system because I'm getting 3 emails a day, 5 emails a day from my boss out, from other web addresses. I know that. How do I stop it? I mean, we've got outside IT, we've got the spam filters, we've got PII, we have phishing tests, we do all that. How do we restrict it? How do we find it and eliminate? That's the question that I ask, because I can do all of that. But how do I know that I know that, hey, Guile is not really sending me that he's changing his banking information for the 4th time this pay period?
You need additional controls in place. I mean, just literally 3 weeks ago, one of our clients, it's a let's just say a construction firm. I don't want to say the name of the firm. It's a Lancaster County business. And they got scammed out of 20 grand because the bookkeeper, the person at this company that's responsible for paying the bills, let's call her the AP person, received an email that looked like it was coming from the CEO. And it was a spoofed email. The hacker basically created an email address that looked just like him.
So it either sounds like Tank, Wrenchmark, or
but make a long story short, she gets an email that looks like it's from him, wire 20 grand to this account to pay this invoice, and she paid it without, I always tell people, trust but verify. So
I believe that is an issue that happened at a local parking authority that was not in this county. the exact same thing.
Yep.
Yeah.
And Keith, you mentioned like how do we stop it, right? And you just got to invest in IT, right? I always like to think of cybersecurity as like an onion, right? I mean, there's a lot of different layers. Like on the very external of the onion, you have like your policies and procedures, like your incident response plan, your bring your own device plan, your employee handbook, and your privacy policy, and things like that. And then from there, you got the stuff that Will does. You got all the software and the training and the MDR and the MFA and the backups and this and that. And then, you have the cyber insurance piece to it. So like, it's unfortunately, just not a one size fits all or not. Yeah. Like you said, Will, like, oh, here's cybersecurity. Here you go. It's, you're going to be constantly, updating it. So.
Yeah. And let me just add one more thing, Keith. Like, right now, as we speak, we have about 40 different security products that we offer.
Right.
40.
And there's probably 1,000 more in the country.
Yeah. Now,
Right.
now, do I have one client that has all 40? Absolutely not. They'd be cybersecurity poor. Like, you could be insurance poor, right?
Yeah.
But there just isn't a 100% secure environment. Understand that we put security services in place to mitigate risks, to lessen the chance of you getting hacked into. It just doesn't exist. I'm going to tell you right now. I could play a trick on your company. I can go and throw a couple USB drives in the parking lot. I guarantee somebody's going to pick one up. They're going to go in their office. They're going to plug it into the computer, and I'm in.
Hey, what's on it?
And I'm in. It's that simple. And you know who's going to do that? Probably the janitor. Probably, the maintenance guy, right? It's that simple. They're going to plug. They're going to plug it into their computer and see what's on it. I'm in. It's that simple. And you can have all of this fancy security and all this Fort Knox, but I'm in. It's that simple.
For our cybersecurity issue, as I mentioned, it was an insurance thing. We have a self-insured captive, and the payment that was supposed to be rerouted to like a new ACH was $42,000. And if we hadn't caught it, that money would have been gone.
Right. Yeah. And the way you catch it is you just have, protocols in place, either a second person or email and phone and fill out a form, or you just have to have the two ways to verify that transfer. And, if you catch it immediately, maybe your bank can claw back the funds. But then, if you don't catch it and the bank can't help, that's where the cyber crime insurance comes into play.
Yeah.
So it's all you can do.
Good deal. All right.
Perfect. Thanks for hanging on, Keith and Catherine. And we'll send a follow-up email and keep on rolling. Have a good rest of your summer.
Hey, Brian, you'll also get a copy of the recording, right?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Thanks.
Hey, guys, thank you. Thanks for taking the time to meet with us today.
Thank you.
See
Have
ya.
a wonderful day. Bye-bye.